Hey everyone, welcome back to the YOUnify podcast. If you're new here, my name is Brandyn Keating. I'm the co-founder and CEO of YOUnify, a nonprofit organization helping you flourish and thrive. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today with Dr. Jocelyn Lehrer. She wears many hats as a public health and gender justice researcher, storyteller, educator, public speaker, and nonprofit founder. She holds a doctoral degree from the Harvard School of Public Health and spent years doing research at UCSF on gender-based violence and youth sexual and reproductive health. She has done gender justice work for over 25 years in the US, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa, with organizations ranging from UN Women to MTV to USAID. In 2008, she founded the Men's Story Project, a bold initiative in which men and masculine identifying people publicly share personal stories that challenge harmful masculinity norms and advance healthy masculinities and social justice. In partnership with many universities and organizations, the Men's Story Project has created 22 original storytelling productions to date across the U.S., as well as in Chile, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Canada, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. Its awards include a ShareCare Emmy for Excellence in Digital Health and Media, and the Men's Story Project has been featured in many media outlets, including a TEDx talk Jocelyn gave at Indiana University. Josie, welcome. How are you today?
I'm good. It's so great to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you here. So, Josie, let's dive right in with what led you to found a storytelling project for men. Was there an insight or a moment that made you think this is what's needed?
Yeah. So as you shared, my background's in public health.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when from a public health standpoint, we want to help prevent societal forms of suffering that are totally preventable and unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for many years, as you shared, I've been doing research related to gender-based violence, so intimate partner violence, sexual assault and harassment. Um, I spent many years also co-facilitating an HIV support group with young gay men and women in San Francisco who were living with HIV. I had spent time working at a rape crisis center, community educator. And when I just got out of college, I also spent time working with a so-called gang risk intervention program in the Mission District of San Francisco, working with kids who were, being pressured to join gangs. And what led me to start the Men's Story Project is uh, seeing in 2008 that there was really very little by way of public dialogue
Mm-hmm.
around how boys and men are being taught and raised and pressured and socialized to be as men. And that has impacts and implications for many aspects of health and well-being and justice for people of genders. And so I wanted to help spark public dialogue on this subject and uplift and celebrate and highlight examples and role models of healthier masculinities. But the way to do that is through men sharing their own stories. Somebody like me can't get up on I could try, but it's not going to be effective to get up on a soapbox and, try and tell people how to be, so it's much more relevant for men to share their own stories, that take a critical look at these stereotypical expectations of masculinity and the different kinds of health and justice impacts that those ideas have that we can talk about in more detail
Mm-hmm.
and spark dialogue that way. Um, yeah, and then the first production that we did was in Berkeley in 2008, and we had 17 men on a stage sharing very personal stories with a live audience, and it was standing room only,
Wow.
standing ovation at the end, and people saying this is revolutionary and needs to keep happening. And that's why I brought the project into my postdoc at UCSF at the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies and started, writing the first iteration training guide on how to create these kinds of productions. Um, And over time, I realized, or short order actually, pretty quickly realized, this is not something that's only to benefit the audience and listeners, but it's something that can really benefit the presenters themselves. And so at this point, the project has evolved to a peer leadership and public narrative for men who want to be part of the change. So they build their skills as leaders and advocates and share their stories. And so it's benefiting lots of different groups.
Beautiful.
Presenters, audience members, and the broader public.
Yeah, well, and story is such a powerful tool for transformation. And I think if a listener or a viewer maybe hasn't experienced one of your events or experienced the power of story, it might be helpful if you could share if there's a moment that has stuck out for you. I'm sure there are a gazillion moments, but if there's a particular moment or story that you heard that might help bring to life for people the power of these events. Is there something on that order that comes to mind?
Absolutely. So many examples. So one is at St. Louis University a few years ago, there was a production that had about 14 or so men on stage. And to be clear, to share a little bit of the detail, they go through around 8 weeks of workshopping where they're learning together about issues at the intersection of masculinities, health, and social justice, and then workshopping and developing the stories that they're going to share publicly. So they're learning together, building community, crafting stories, and that culminates in these public storytelling events. So one story that stands out to me was from a young guy named Josie, who's a recent grad of St. Louis University. And he shares a story about porn addiction and healing from porn addiction.
Wow.
And he shares the whole journey of, of being in it, and seeing porn as a way of dealing with all of his stresses and coming to objectify women as a result. And then how he finally sought help and he told his fiancée about it, and the journey of seeking support and moving in this journey of healing. And he shared that in front of a live audience of about 300 people.
Wow.
Of his own community of, St. Louis University students and local, folks in the community and so on. And that was filmed. These live events are all filmed to create content for YouTube and other social media. And, so that was one. Then I think it was in the same production, there was another guy, or it might have been the earlier year at St. Louis University. There was another guy, young guy, originally from Honduras, I believe, who shared a story about how his grandfather had committed suicide. Wow. And his grandfather believed that men should be hard and stoic and have un corazón como piedra, a heart like a rock. And his story was basically saying, what he said is, I don't want to be that way. Yeah. And I know what it feels like to feel alone in a room full of people. And so he was exhorting the audience, if you ever feel like you're having a mental health challenge or feeling depressed or sad or just need to talk to someone, and don't allow yourself to be, so impacted by these stereotypical ideas that say that men are supposed to be stoic rocks, and then at the end, he was offering his listening ear to anyone who ever wants to talk to him. Wow. And I think that's also really an important aspect of this project is the local storytelling, because it enables the conversations and the connection to continue and to grow beyond the live events themselves.
And the bravery to share that level of vulnerability that you've described in each of those two stories is striking as well.
And there are hundreds.
There are hundreds. No, I can only imagine. And it sounds like they're available on YouTube for people to view. Is that right?
Yeah. So all of the live events that we've done have been filmed to create media content. And groups can also work to produce any kind of creative output that they might want. We've found that it's very powerful to create these live events and film them, to make social media videos of each person's story. And so those are on the YouTube channel. And if you check out the Men's Story Project YouTube channel, of course, please hit subscribe. It's free. But all of the playlists are from the different productions that have taken place.
Beautiful. And we'll link that in the description below on YouTube and across our socials for folks who want to check that out, which I would encourage all of you who are watching and listening to do. So the Men's Story Project sits at an interesting intersection. You're a woman creating a space for men to do this work, grounded in a feminist, anti-racist framework. How do you think about that dynamic, and how has it shaped the way you've built the project?
Well, I think the only way to build a project like this is through an intersectional feminist anti-racist lens.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it would be terrible and should not be done. So that's my thought on that. And I think
clear.
Anybody of any gender can do that. And so I happen to have founded this initiative, but the local program teams. So we always work through partnerships. I produced and directed the initial handful of productions in Berkeley and San Francisco and Chile. And since then, the project has mainly operated through partnerships, with universities, with UN Women in Gaza and the West Bank, with organizations like Men Healing and the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. And so the way it works is that the local organization, be it a school or org, they have a program team of facilitators, story coaches, and producers. I and some other colleagues provide training. There's a Men's Story Project resource package of the curriculum, this 8-session curriculum, guidance on complementary one-on-one coaching that happens outside of the workshops. There's an action guide on how to do this project from start to finish in terms of thinking about, planning and formative research in the setting to understand and think about, what are the issues at the nexus of masculinity and justice that are relevant in this setting. And then they design their program with their local context in mind and realities in mind. And this project is meant to be locally adapted, and it's always led by local teams. And to your question about gender, the local teams are always have really been mixed gender. And what we have found and been told also by the participants is that the specific gender, of a program director doesn't matter as much as the content of what they have to share. With that said, I think it is important for at least some of the facilitators to be male. It's helpful, but really, it's more the content of who they are and what they're bringing to the table.
Yeah, beautiful. So, Josie, you've worked in the U.S., Latin America, the Middle East, Africa. What have you learned about the universals and the differences when it comes to masculinity norms across cultures? Are there things that are the same everywhere? And are there things that have surprised you or surprised people in general?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think it is remarkable how robust the so-called man box is. There's this famous exercise in the masculinities field that was developed by one of my mentors, Paul Kivel, in the Oakland Men's Project in the 80s, which asks exercises, ask anybody, any group, what are the stereotypical ideas about what it means to be a real man that you grew up with or that you feel surrounded by? And people will list out, these ideas, these macho man ideals, being physically strong and heterosexual and having lots of women and, tall and a leader and financially, providing for your family. And, and some of these ideas are not necessarily bad, like being a financial provider, or being healthy, per se. But it's when they're taken to an extreme, when one has to meet all of these things all of the time, but also not seeking help and being stoic and self-reliant and self-sufficient. Certainly being straight, all the things, it's an inhuman set of expectations that few men can meet. And so this macho, real man ideal has a lot of consistency around the world. And there's something called masculinities, which is, just think about, in different cultures and communities, there's different ideas and ideals around how men ideally should be. So what looks one way in, one part of Boston of, primarily white working class men might not be the same as what you see in Newark, New Jersey, with men of color. Things look different in different communities, different specifics. But there's a lot of commonalities still. And also in Gaza and the West Bank, there's commonalities with what you see in Guatemala is around the macho man stuff, but then the specifics of, whether girls are or are not allowed to go to school, or the norms, honoring of girls, and whether that's acceptable. You see difference in different parts of the world. So I hope that there's, this a lot of commonalities, but then it's also always really important when you're going to consider creating an image in any setting to do the formative research, which is the initial learning and research to understand what are the norms and beliefs here, what are the practices here, so that you can create an initiative that speaks to that directly. And and that's why the Men's Story Project is always in collaboration with local teams who are leading their local work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So important. And you said that the stories that come out from the men are often things that were just beneath the surface, stories men hadn't told publicly, maybe ever. Can you share a little bit more about what kinds of stories tend to emerge and if there are things that men most need to say that they've never been given permission to say?
That's a great question too. So I'll say, as a public health and social justice project, the kinds of stories that we're inviting, have this kind of social health, social change and health kind of aim. Mm-hmm. We've seen three themes in the stories that men have shared of celebrating, challenging, and resisting. So men are celebrating sources of beauty and love and connection in their life. Like the joys of being a caring, expressive, nurturing dad, of gratitude to family members or to traditions that have been strengthening for them or to mentors in their lives. Challenging is challenging ideas about masculinity that need to be challenged, the rigid or harmful ones, through the lens of their life experience. And so there we've seen men. There have been men, for example, just now in Costa Rica, there was a man who was incarcerated for domestic violence and then joined a men's group, an organization that works with men. He's been there for 5 years, and he shared a story publicly about called "Learning to Unlearn," and about his journey of unlearning all of these ideas around machismo and the acceptability of domestic violence. And now he has a partner, a new girlfriend. And he said, shared with an audience of around 150 people, I've learned to love differently. I'm a different person, but it's talking about the journey of how he got there. Mm-hmm. And, men have talked about unlearning homophobia, coming to accept their trans son and love their trans son as they are, living with HIV and dealing with parental rejection, coming to a place of pride, as who they are as a gay or queer trans man, having been a sexual harasser at work and deciding to change their ways and taking a really critical look at themselves now that they're about to become a dad. Mm. Another guy who didn't speak up when he was told by some of his fraternity brothers that a woman at his fraternity who had been raped by one of his fraternity brothers, and he didn't speak up, and he shared with an audience that he realized he had been an enabling man, and committing to not being that way in the future and to being more of an active intervener. And this is a man who's on his way, probably at this point now, has become a priest. Wow. Lots of powerful stories over time. Another man named Galen a while back shared a story about having been physically abused by his dad and how he was involved in a lot of violence against other men and also against his girlfriend. And he shares his story of change, of how he sought therapy and went to men's groups and sat in restorative justice circles. And he shared that with his girlfriend in the audience. And he wrote me a letter and a long email, about a decade later, saying that participating in the project had been a turning point in his life.
Wow.
Because it enabled him to be accountable publicly to his community and invite them to hold him accountable. He's now married with kids, and I know him and I know his wife. And, part of the strength, I think, of this project and part of the contribution is that it's a framework for local work, which really it helps, as I said before, support continuity. And then the resisting, just to get to that last important theme, is talking about intersecting forms of oppression that men have been on the receiving end of or that they've perpetuated themselves that are connected with masculinities as well. But so that's where, unlearning, talking about homophobia, transphobia, racism, ableism, all of the isms and just, what it's been like for them to perpetuate them or be on the receiving end, etc., asserting their as so these I think in this project, part of what's happening pedagogically is that in terms of a theory of change is that the people who participate in this project, these are men and folks who identify with masculinity in any kind of way, including non-binary folks. These are folks who want to be part of the change. And so they say, yes, I want to be part of this community of folks who's going to learn together about issues at the nexus of gender, health, and justice in my setting. I want to craft a piece that I'm going to share publicly, and I think that, and so what we've seen in terms of evaluation, which I can share more, is that it is indeed edifying, for the presenters themselves, the participants, audiences. There's a social network effect as well, where folks in the audience and who are participants, there's lots of conversation that happens, for weeks and months and however long after, about the experience. And there's also the opportunity to form a group locally, with this that can continue. And so we've seen that as well in terms of continuity and integration with other local work. So that was a really long answer to your question, but and I think the project is functioning at lots of different levels of, the individual, the group that forms, the connection with the audience, and then all of the social network effect, dialogue and conversation, and then the media that's developed also then has its own reach and its own impact.
And so where do you hope the project will go? It's had so much impact already. It's clearly transformative for individuals and communities. I'm curious as to what your vision for the future is, and if there's something that listeners who are moved by this conversation can do to get involved and be part of the ongoing Story of the Men's Story project.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So one way to definitely get involved is if you're interested in creating, adapting this kind of work for your setting, be it a college campus or a community-based organization or something else, that's very available. And so we have a resource package for groups that are interested, and that includes, as I mentioned earlier, an action guide, a curriculum that can be adapted, a participant contract, including media release form, and so on. There's guidelines for prevention and doing this work in an ethical, trauma-informed way with participants who may have experienced trauma or want to talk about violence that they've experienced or perpetrated. So a resource package is available, and I'd love to see this project taken up, by groups that are interested in adapting it in any kind of way that feels relevant for your setting. And then we also offer shorter or like easier things to do.
Yeah.
So we offer like day-long workshops or half-day workshops on masculinities and storytelling, film screenings. So I'm happy. I do travel to campuses or to different places to offer workshops that are always very participatory. And in terms of things that are coming up, there are groups in different parts of the world that we're writing grant proposals with to basically give this work to different leading organizations regionally, so that they can adapt it and then just fully take it forward in their settings. And there's also an NCAA athlete initiative in the works in partnership with a university here in California. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say yet. But so
Secret
yeah,
university.
secret university, possibly. Anyway, so yeah, there are lots of projects cooking, and this resource package is available now for groups that might be interested.
Amazing. Well, our time has absolutely flown by. We're going to have you back. But I do want to make sure if we can kind of rapid fire share 3 things with folks. One is the format that you described is in such contrast to a panel or a talk. And I wonder if you can sort of give folks a brief nugget on why that's so important. And then also wondering what else is on the horizon for you, and how you would most like folks to engage with you. And then finally, if there were just one thing that somebody who is like, wow, I'm concerned about these challenges with masculinity, if there was just one thing that they could do when they stop listening to this, when they get done listening to the podcast, is there something simple, some first step? It feels like a big, gnarly problem to address. So yeah, I wonder if you could rapid fire address those 3 things.
Yeah. So you might have to remind me of them exactly. But so in terms of the format, one thing that I actually want to add is that this project can be very readily adapted to have different outputs at the end. And so one thing that I am really excited about doing, looking forward, is working with cohorts of existing online, like positive male influencers.
Beautiful.
There's a whole massive reality and challenge of the manosphere and all of the ways that is sucking masses of men around the world in and radicalizing them. So this is something that I want to add now around the world and in the US. Young men's attitudes around masculinity are becoming more restrictive. Young men, high proportions, feel isolated and alone, and all the more so if they adhere and buy into these man box norms that I was describing.
Mm-hmm.
Rates of suicidality or of suicidal ideation are around 6 times higher for young men who believe or are trying to adhere to these man box norms. So there is a context of urgency,
Yes.
that we really need to be working to reach young men where they are.
Absolutely.
And that includes online. And so one thing that I would really like to be doing moving forward is working with cohorts of existing online positive influencers to like help them skill up and tool up and get organized around, how they want to use their platform to share positive messages and helpful messages amidst whatever other content they're sharing. Be it sports or, whatever it might be. So, and to your question of, what is different about this project from a panel or a talk, I think live storytelling is never going to go out of style.
Yeah.
So when we're
Well
talking
said.
about live local storytelling, it builds community. There's a lot of research around ways in which true personal storytelling, when done in a way that really helps people see how a person went on a journey and how they navigated challenges and how and why they, endeavored to go from A to B and the benefits of, the change that they made, that they're experiencing. All of that, facilitates learning and influence, So when somebody shares, anybody can sit on a panel and tell people what the statistics are,
Yeah.
or how they ought to be. It's really something else completely when somebody gets on a stage and says, this is how I for depression. And this is why I finally reached out. Or this is why I was silent for 30 years of my life, or, 10 years of my life about having been sexually assaulted as a child. This is why I finally sought help, and how. And I challenge that notion that men can't be assaulted by, can't be sexually assaulted, or if I'm sexually assaulted, it automatically means I'm gay. Actually, no, in this case, I'm not gay. And I am very happy to seek help because it helped me.
Yeah.
So like that kind of personal sharing, there's no replacement for that. There's no statistic or, expert on a box, who's going to replace that. So
Beautiful.
that's why storytelling.
Amazing. Well, we are going to include all the links to connect with Josie and the Men's Story Project below in the description if you're catching this on YouTube, and across our socials. And we invite you to check out the videos on the Men's Story Project YouTube page and look for ways that you can get involved in making a difference as well. Thank you so much, Josie. It's been such a pleasure to have you here, and we'll definitely have to have you back. There's clearly so much more to dig into.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time, folks. Are you in Panama City?